My budeme pokračovat samozřejmě dál.
We will continue with Kimberly Nei, who is the Talent Analytics Director, and she will be coming up with insights on DEI. She will tell us how a good leader should do, what they should look like, and how to improve our hiring initiatives.
Thank you for coming.
I'm a bit accident prone, and I would like to save your ears from me accidentally dropping the mic. Can help you. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Is this a good height? Okay. 20 minutes. 20 minutes? You can do that. Okay. I am so appreciative to be here today to talk to you about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sorry, which thing do I hit? Or this remote?
Sorry, yeah, that should work, yeah.
Yes, okay. Yes. So thank you all for being here. A big thank you to Assessment Systems, and happy birthday. 20 years is quite the accomplishment. So, I'd like to begin by asking you to think about what you would draw if I asked you to draw a picture of a leader. If we had time, I'd ask you to get a piece of paper out and do this, but I have 20 minutes, so we won't. Research shows that you would likely draw a white male. Most people do, even women. And in fact, the first time I did this activity, I did this as well. And I think this is because we all hold this bias as our archetype of a leader. And we won't see this change until we see more representation at top leadership positions. Now I'd like to ask you to think about what you see when you look at me. You might say that I'm a female. You might guess that I'm in my 30s. You might notice that I have dark hair and skin, and that's because I'm a US Native American. Those are examples of inherent diversity characteristics, things that I'm born with. I also have acquired diversity characteristics, things I acquired through my lived experiences, such as growing up poor. None of those characteristics make me better or worse at a job. By the way, just as I suspect that being male doesn't make you a better leader. But an organization can leverage my unique background and my unique perspective to the benefit of innovation, or to just understand the perspectives of your diverse client base, but only if I'm treated fairly, if I'm included in the conversation, and I'm heard. And that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion is all about. Diversity is about creating and valuing all of the different ways that a person can differ. So ethnicity, nationality, gender, sexual orientation, religion, disability, but also perspectives and values and beliefs. Equity is about the perception of access, opportunity, advancement, being fair for all individuals, regardless of how they differ. It's about creating an even playing field for all individuals. Inclusion is about creating an environment or culture where everyone feels welcomed and valued and respected and heard, regardless of how they differ. And the case for DE&I is quite clear. It makes sense from an intuitive perspective, both from moral reasons, but also business reasons. It makes sense, especially at the rate of organizations globalizing and entering new markets, that you would want to have diverse perspectives and backgrounds. And you can see this in the data. Having a workforce that reflects the diversity within your client or the broader working population means that you're going to be reflecting the diversity of your client or market base. And minority customers have a significant buying power, and they want to see themselves represented in the organizations from which they purchase. Research has shown that diversity can lead to better problem solving, improved innovation, or just overall general productivity by leveraging unique perspectives. And we can see this impact on the bottom line. Companies with higher than average diversity have been shown to have 19% higher innovation revenues, and this was an article from 2018, the Harvard Business Review. Organizations with above average gender diversity and high engagement show that they can outperform their competitors by up to 58%. During the pandemic, we saw some prime examples of female leaders in governance leading through crisis better than their male counterparts. But we can also see this in firm performance. Organizations with higher representation of women in C-suite positions have 34% greater returns to their shareholders. And while only 5% of Fortune 1000 companies are run by women, those organizations contribute more to the total revenue of the Fortune 1000. So there's a measurable impact of showing the diversity. I don't mean to focus only on gender, and I do have a lot of examples throughout my deck today. That's really because it's a diversity characteristic or an inherent diversity characteristic that is easy to study globally. But one research study did show that organizations with two-dimensional diversity, meaning having both inherent and acquired diversity characteristics, were 45% more likely to report market growth and 70% more likely to enter a new market in the last year. And there's moral reasons that we should consider how individuals are discriminated against through practices within an organization. While we see more females at the top of the house and those top leadership positions, research shows they often have to do more to get there, to overcome those negative feminine stereotypes. We see prime examples in politics, females or other diverse candidates being more qualified than their counterparts. And that, kind of shows that that bias exists in all of us. Many political candidates are voted on by us. And while I say we're seeing more females at the top of the house, in 2018, New York Times published this pretty interesting article showing that within the Fortune 500 chief executives, there were just as many men named John as there are females. Just as many men named John. And in fact, there are more men named James. John is just the equivalent to women, so it's worse. And the numbers don't look better for other types of diversity. And you may say, well, that was 2018. Diversity, equity, inclusion has been a hot topic. Surely we've shown some improvement, and that's not the case. Glassdoor publishes The Economist publishes a Glass Ceiling Index, really struggling, Glass Ceiling Index every year, and they show that those numbers really have not improved since then. Here's Glassdoor. Glassdoor published some research recently showing that 76% of employees think that diversity is an important factor when considering employment. So they care about seeing diversity in the workplace. And this is especially true for young talent. Gen Z and millennials would be hesitant to join a company that doesn't have representation at the top of the house. 50% of employees say that they would want their organization to do more to increase diversity. But what do we see from perspectives of leaders in these organizations? It's maybe quite bleak in the US. 51% of white male executives, who we know make up the majority of leadership positions, think that DE&I initiatives are really just kind of a distraction for the real work. Maybe things are better in Europe. 70% of executives, there were 573 surveyed, they indicated that they could see how DE&I could improve performance. But while they can see that connection, we're not actually seeing that play out in action. Of those individuals that were surveyed, only 15% indicated that they had a real DE&I strategy embedded in their business. 33% had no strategy at all, and the rest were either reactive, meaning doing something when they were forced to, or they just were focused on increasing diversity alone, which we will talk about in a moment as to why that's a problem. 34% of these executives also indicated that they had a chief diversity officer in place, which means that 66% do not. And that's listed as a top 5 barrier to the success of a DE&I strategy. Further, and this is probably the bleaker statistic, only 1% of those actually reported to the CEO, meaning their impact was truly limited. 78% of employees said that they work at an organization that lacks diversity, and maybe 57% would leave their job for an organization that's more inclusive. So in summary, employees care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And organizations are facing big challenges that emphasize the importance of having a diversity, equity, inclusion strategy. We've seen individuals being burnt out and being frustrated from the stress of the pandemic. We're seeing talent shortages at unprecedented levels, especially in industries like manufacturing and services. which really creates supply chain issues at a time when demands for goods and services are at an all-time high. Organizations that want to have a competitive advantage in the war for talent are focusing on the human experience. And we just saw all of those statistics about employees caring about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So said simply, having a DE&I strategy may be crucial for recruiting in a tight labor market. And I think organizations know this. A really common trend that we're seeing right now is organizations posting these diversity statements, saying they're committed to improving diversity. But given that we know that only 15% of European companies have a true DE&I strategy, it sort of feels like these are just that, just statements. And you do truly need to have a diversity, equity, inclusion strategy. First, you need to set clear goals, goals that can be tracked and measured and communicated to the organization. And this is a big challenge, especially for organizations that are global, where demographics change from location to location. What we see commonly is organizations benchmarking or exploring the diversity within the broader working population, and then seeking to replicate that within their workforce through the recruiting and hiring practices. Something else we're seeing organizations do is just start with a simple goal, something like improving gender diversity, because that can be applied worldwide. For equity, we want to review policies and practices that may be leading to discriminatory practices. Do you have diversity in your leadership positions? If not, is there a key inflection point when you're losing talent? Or like the research shows, are you requiring minority individuals to be more qualified in order to be promoted? And finally, you need to build an inclusive culture or environment. And we think a critical component here is identifying and developing inclusive leaders. And there are two clear ways that Hogan can help you with this strategy. So let's talk about that. Hogan, what? Okay, perfect. Hogan provides assessments for individuals and organizations to understand how their personality and their values impact their reputation within the workplace. So the two things that you can do, once you've set your diversity goals, you can use Hogan's assessments to increase diversity and promote fairness through your selection of all employees. And then second, you can use our assessments to identify and develop inclusive leaders. So let's talk about this first goal. The first note I want to make on promoting fairness is that you want to make sure you're using a selection practice that predicts performance. And I think that's a really crucial component. There are all kinds of selection methods that don't discriminate, but they also don't identify individuals that can do the job. And if you're bringing individuals that are not qualified, that doesn't really seem that fair, and it's really not that helpful for you. We know our assessments can predict performance. Our profiles predict from a range of 0.3 to 0.5 when we combine multiple assessments. If these numbers don't mean as much, we can also talk about this in terms of ROI. Things like reducing turnover or improving retention, predicting better performance ratings or potential for advancement, or even objective metrics, reducing accidents. In this case, we saw that individuals that were hired with our safety tool had 40% fewer accidents, which led to a huge decrease in the number of days lost on the job. The second note is that our assessments do not discriminate, meaning we see no meaningful subgroup differences on categories like sex or age. And that's what you can see in these graphs. What you're seeing, I know they're small, but basically these lines are virtually overlapping. We don't see differences between these groups. And that means, regardless if you're truly setting a goal, you're going to be able to increase your diversity just through using our assessments, because everyone has a fair, equal opportunity to get a job. And then finally, just a note that we want this diversity to extend to personality as well. We don't want to have an organization of personality clones, right? We want to have individuals with diversity of thought, variance in the ways that they approach problems or situations, and that is true with Hogan. With our assessments, we can build a trillion possible profiles, and profiles should vary for each job, meaning you're going to have variance across the organization, and then within a job, you're really only screening a few critical scales at the extreme ends. So for example of what this looks like, this is data from my data science team. We use our tools for selection, and we do see a little bit restricted diversity on a couple of scales. We want our team to be highly interpersonally sensitive and also highly prudent, because we want to work collaboratively as a team. We can't make mistakes. And so you're seeing some restriction there. Scales like sociability we allow to vary, meaning we hire extroverts, we hire introverts, and this just highlights the importance of leading this team, being able to leverage your diverse characteristics, but also working to manage where we see less diversity. So for example, we're highly prudent, meaning we are probably going to create structure and need to know that that may mean that we lack flexibility in working with others. So that's an unconscious bias that we have to be aware of and work to manage. This is more commonly what we would see across an organization. This is a high-performing leadership team. While it's the same job, leadership, it's truly leading all different kinds of functions, meaning you want to have different characteristics. And so you see much more diversity across the profiles. This is probably the more crucial component that I'm going to speak to you about today, identifying and developing inclusive leaders. Really, honestly, bringing in diverse talent is quite easy. Even if you're not setting goals, like I said, just use personality and you're going to increase your diverse talent. The bigger challenge is retaining that diverse talent once you bring them in the door. If you do nothing to build an inclusive culture, that talent's just going to exit right back out the other door. And so identifying leaders that can help foster this environment of inclusion is quite critical. To explore this topic, we examined our archive of matched assessment and performance data and identified 2 critical competencies: leveraging diversity and caring about people. Leveraging diversity is about respecting and valuing individual differences, so discouraging discrimination, treating people fairly, showing respect and tolerance. Caring about people is displaying sensitivity towards the attitudes, feelings, or circumstances of others. So being sensitive to, how other people feel and being able to put yourself into others' shoes. We identified characteristics that would predict these inclusive behaviors by aggregating correlations across 47 organizations using a method called meta-analysis. Just to orient you, when you're seeing an upwards arrow, that means as an individual scores higher on this characteristic, they're going to be more likely to display inclusion behaviors. So for the HPI, our bright side measure, we found that individuals who are highly adjusted, interpersonally sensitive, and prudent are going to be more likely to display inclusion behaviors. In practice, this means that for developing and selecting leadership talent, you want individuals who are optimistic, who won't personalize criticism, who are going to be perceptive and willing to build trusting relationships, and who are good organizational citizens. Next, we looked at the HDS, our dark side measure. Here we see negative relationships or downwards arrows. That means as an individual scores higher on the scale, they're going to be less likely to show inclusion behaviors. Here we're going to be concerned about individuals who are intolerant or hard to please, suspicious of others' intentions, maybe arrogant or unlikely to seek the opinions of others, and just generally oblivious to the concerns of others. For the MVPI, our values measure, we see a mix of relationships. For altruistic, we see a positive relationship, and this intuitively makes sense. These individuals want to make the world a better place and contribute to society, and so this may be a characteristic that you attend to in your selection practice. For recognition and power, we see negative relationships. Again, this maybe makes sense. These individuals want to be in charge and they want to be in the spotlight, and that may mean they're less likely to listen to others or share that spotlight. One caveat here is that we know power is a positive predictor of other positive leadership outcomes. And so that may mean you're still selecting high-power individuals, but then that really emphasizes the need for development, focusing on those unconscious biases that may stifle your DE&I efforts. So this is really just here for you to take a photo. This is the descriptor of the inclusive leader. So I'm wrapping up, I promise. So I don't want to make it seem like DE&I is simple. It's a complex topic, and there are a couple of clear ways that Hogan can help you with your strategy, but you do need to have a clear DE&I strategy. Research has been very clear that half-baked attempts at DE&I can actually have negative impacts. So while I showed you some positive stats, there are also negative things if you take a check-the-box approach, meaning having a diversity policy or diversity training, or really even just having a chief diversity officer that doesn't report to the CEO and it doesn't actually have any decision-making authority within the organization. And your leadership talent is really going to be critical to making sure that that doesn't happen. Your chief executives need to be aligned on the DE&I strategy, and it needs to be embedded explicitly within the business strategy. They need to create and commit realistic goals that they are measuring and tracking and communicating to employees. Once employees see real action, they're really going to start to build trust. And then finally, having continual coaching or framing for these leaders. They're going to get it wrong, and really the only way to rebuild trust is to try again and try again with humility. And I do just want to say that I didn't explicitly talk about equity today, and remember that's about the perception of fairness. So while you're working to bring in diverse talent and you're building trust with those individuals by building inclusive practices and giving them voice and making them feel heard, perceptions of fairness are going to improve, but there's a lot more around organizational justice structures that we can't tackle here today, things like pay equity issues. But I don't mean to say that equity is unimportant, it's just a piece that we're not directly impacting. So in conclusion, I just want to highlight what this means in practice. So you want to make sure you're understanding the job and what it takes to do the job, and then using tools that don't discriminate to select individuals into those jobs. Second, you're going to want to select and promote and develop leaders who can build an inclusive culture. Most commonly, how we see this applied in practice is organizations taking inclusion and embedding it explicitly into their competency models, especially at the leadership level, and then using tools that can predict those behaviors. And then finally, providing feedback to employees to enhance self-awareness. And this really, truly can happen at all levels. We focused on leadership because they have the biggest impact, but it truly can make a difference with all of your employees. Thank you.
You have been talking for exactly 20 minutes. That's incredible. You did it. You did a great job. Do you want to ask anything? That's a unique opportunity to ask Kimberly. Yeah, we have a question over there. I will give you the mic. Just a second.
Thank you. Hi. I just wanted to ask if you do have any example, maybe, because we hear lots about those statistics and the theory, but I think that to promote it effectively in our environment would be very helpful to have example how increasing diversity, whatever that means, helped to really improve a certain team, So living concrete examples. And also the fact that diversity is not men-women thing, but it's much more deeper. So this is missing. So sometimes, it gets disevaluated because the diversity is really about opinion, characteristics, population, copying, and so on. So I think this I'm missing. So if you have some, could you share? Thank you.
Sure. So, you're absolutely right, and I think people tend to think about this sometimes into these categories, and people aren't a category. So you're absolutely right, and that's why I did want to emphasize most people that think about diversity today are not thinking about it just in terms of those inherent characteristics, being a male or female. It's also those acquired characteristics, your experience, the things that you've developed through your lived experience. We can see examples of I mean, those statistics are from that kind of research showing that having those diverse perspectives can lead to things like improved innovation because you have unique perspectives and you're bringing unique ideas to the table. But you can also see when you don't have that, negative impacts. So you can probably see it in an example. Think about maybe a commercial you've seen and you watch it once and you're immediately offended and you think, oh, if they had just had a female in the room, that commercial would have not made it to the market. I mean, I think that's the kind of examples that probably mean more to people because they're directly impacted. So you can see it on the negative as well. Just having those unique perspectives, having your customer or market base represented in the room can make sure that you don't make those big mistakes, whether it's marketing a commercial or a product or making a key decision about your business.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who is interested in more details? No, it seems that that's it. Oh,
Yes.
Well, thank you. Great, thanks for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I spent 4.5 years in a global diversity function for our company, Stanton Chase, which is an executive search company, and I very much believe executive search consultants have a lot to do in order to promote that idea. But that requires a lot of effort, and it is educating your client, certainly, and also educating your candidates. Because from my experience of over 25 years, I can certainly declare that there are a lot of issues in diversity candidates, and I have lots of examples about women candidates who really need to be coached, right, and supported in order to dare and become candidates for these top roles. So I've seen that throughout my experience. Having said that, I can tell you that there are clubs or organizations or forums, better to say, that promote aspirational goals of an X percentage of female executives on boards. And one of those is a 30% club, which I think it's an American organization which has chapters all around the world. My company is a member of those. I'm not sure about the Czech market, but in Poland we have about 18% of women serving board members of stock-listed companies. I'm not sure about the Czech market. Maybe someone from this country would be able to share some data. But thank you very much. It's been most interesting, and I appreciated your viewpoints. Thank you.
Can I just make a quick comment? So to your first point, I think it's a very good point about female candidates or others daring to want to have those leadership positions. It's a very fair point. So while I talked about female candidates having to be more qualified to get to those positions, some of that is on them. And research has shown that 60 males will apply for a position if they feel 60% qualified, where a female must feel like she's 100% qualified. And that's a really, really important factor there. So part of it is our own biases. And we are the ones voting people into position in political arenas. So a lot of it is about the work we all have to do. I think it's a very fair point.
thank you very much. Another question?
Please don't run away. I just want to comment as well. So let me just also comment, Małgorzata Milczarek-Bukowska, also Poland, sorry, MetLife. I'm responsible for countries in Europe, and I'm dealing with diversity and inclusion. We have the strategy. Is it perfect? I don't think so, but it's in place. But I just wanted to comment about two things. So first of all, when we are talking about the gender diversity, we are very much concentrating on the top level, which is of course important. However, our findings lastly was that at least in our business, we are not building pipeline from the bottom, and we have, let's say, I think that this is something what is critical. And there is another side of this coin as well. That's, again, in our business, majority of women on the majority of people on the lower grades, in the organization, they are women. So there is something which basically stopped them. So that's probably one, and we are probably not unique here. But one more thing, I believe while we are talking about the D&I, or DEI right now, yes, I think that we very much concentrate on D, and meaning very often gender diversity. E, it's quite new and probably not fairly understood, but I believe that we are completely ignore I, which I think is a critical point, and I believe that corporates should concentrate much more there, not to also lose the men in this battle to some extent.
Right.
Yep.
No, it's a great point, absolutely. Yep.
We have another question. Okay.
Hi, my name is Petra Jelinkova, Human Garden. I have a question. What do you think about quotas in the companies for having diverse teams, like women, men, and to have really specific quotas, like to have 50-50 teams? Because this discussion, is it good or bad to have quotas and real numbers to say, okay, let's promote women to get some number of them in the C levels?
So I think it's important to set goals and be measuring and tracking against those. So in some way, maybe that sounds like a quota. You're wanting to get to that, that goal. But I don't think you want to have a quota with every, hiring decision that's being made, because, that could lead to unfair practices. Going back to the beginning, what I talked about, making sure the individual can do the job. So, I think you want to set the goal and you want to meet that goal, but not at each individual hiring or promotional decision. And I think, our colleague over here made a great point. If you're just focusing on the diversity piece, you're really probably going to have some, unintended consequences. So you're not building that inclusive culture that retains the diverse talent. You're probably not focused on making sure that individuals are developed so that they can, be promoted to those next levels. If you're really wanting to have that goal met at the top team level, you probably have talent within that can be promoted if they're being developed along the way. So I think having a more holistic approach is probably the more ideal way to go.
Thank you very much. Okay, the last one.
Hello. I would like to have diversity in the communication as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, just a small comment from man's side. I was responsible. I'm 30 plus years in management, and I'm in IT industry, responsible for large development units across the globe. And we as well tried to have a diversity in our teams. Small problem. When you look at, I do not know a total picture from other countries. I have total picture from Czech Republic. When I look into technical universities, number of females studying a technical university area, especially in IT industry, is less than 10%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you want then, in IT industry in Czech Republic, to have a diversity in your teams, regardless quota and whatsoever, it starts to be very difficult.
Yes.
Very difficult.
Yeah, and that's something that's not unique to here. I mean, actually, most IT companies publish a diversity index for that reason. And I mean, companies like Facebook, they promote their stats around how they're working to improve, and you see numbers dipping up 18%, 19%, but it's slow moving. And I think it's a great point. We had the Chief Diversity Officer from Pfizer join our podcast. Ryan is our host of our Science of Personality podcast. If you haven't listened, you might check it out. It's fantastic. But he talked about that, and Ryan asked the same question. For very specialized fields or specific industries, if people aren't being educated, and then there's not talent to even be recruiting, what do you do? And I thought his answer was brilliant, and so I'll just share that with you. He said, well, because we are big enough and we can make this impact, we start doing that work at a sooner level. So they have programs to give scholarships to diverse people at the schooling level, so that you're getting more diverse talent educated that you can then recruit, into internships. And I realize not all organizations can do that, and that, maybe doesn't work everywhere, but it's a fair point, and I think that's what we're starting to see big organizations do to really move that needle. We realize the difference has to be made sooner. As young children are making decisions about careers and having that opportunity to get educated. Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you for the comments.
Yes.
I cannot avoid one more comment,
Okay.
because I feel that we are getting too many contradictions and too many clashes. Isn't it enough to focus on E as equality? Because diversity and inclusion may bring you many contrasts, and we may feel that the way to go diversity or inclusion may mean that you will discriminate, for example, white males. So if the equality will be the issue, let's open the world. I really don't care if somebody wears skirts or trousers. I don't mind. If
Sure.
somebody is the best and is qualified enough, okay, let's. It's the game.
I mean, I think the numbers show where I don't think we're at risk of that quite yet. We still just have so much representation, especially in top leadership positions. I mean, again, go back to that slide. We have just as many white males named John as we have females in those top positions. So I don't think we're at risk of that. But yeah, you make a fair point that you don't want to be discriminating against any characteristic, and not male-female, unique perspectives and backgrounds, and so that's why it's important to not be thinking about things in terms of categories. And the last thing I'll say is the great thing about using personality for selection practices is it's blind to all of that. It helps you identify individuals that can do the job, and even if you're not setting goals around wearing a skirt or pants, you're going to increase your diversity, and you're going to have individuals that can do the job.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Thank you.